Labour tells the country the government's delivering nothing but chaos until their own conference is upended by a shock frontbench resignation. Tonight we ask what the loss of Andy McDonald tells us about trust in the leadership and the ideological pull of the party. We speak live to a member of Keir Starmer's shadow cabinet. Also tonight, queues on the roads and staff shortages. What part does Brexit play in the turmoil now hitting many parts of the UK? In his first UK broadcast interview, we hear from the EU's former chief negotiator, Michel Barnier.
I wish the best for the UK. I think it was a incredible decision to leave the single market, to end the freedom of movement. It is a British choice. It's too late now to come back on the past. Our main asset is single market, and a key part of the single market is the freedom of movement. So you will see what could happen in UK, but the UK has to face the consequences and to assume the consequences of Brexit. Nobody else.
Hello, good evening. On paper, it should be an open goal for Labour. The government's talking about calling in the army to sort out the chaos and queues on our roads. A long-term dilemma of a lack of lorry drivers has come to breaking point after Brexit and COVID. Businesses are running short of supplies and short of staff to deliver them. And all this against a backdrop of soaring energy bills and a looming winter crisis. So why isn't Labour making hay with all this? Because it seems they have an ideological war of their own to fight. And this evening that came to a head with the resignation of a shadow minister, which some on the leader's side believe was orchestrated to upset the conference. Andy McDonald accused Keir Starmer of leaving Labour more divided than ever. Team Starmer are shrugging their shoulders. But Labour is struggling to find its economic space, faced by a government who is outspending even its wildest dreams and landing their tanks on Labour turf. Tonight we look at the peril for both parties. And our political editor, Nick Watt, starts for us in Brighton. Nick.
Well, Emily, as you say, we have a government fighting hard to ensure that we can fill up our cars with petrol, and we have a Labour Party talking to itself, and no opposition party wants to be in that position. Now, in recent months, beneath the surface, we've had a battle between Keir Starmer and the left of the party sizzling, but that battle has now blown into the open today with, as you say, the resignation of Andy McDonald from the shadow cabinet. So the left, they're not happy with the new tough fiscal message from the leadership, and they're also deeply disturbed by the leadership rule changes, which means it's very, very difficult to see how they could credibly field a leadership candidate whenever the next leadership election takes place. Interesting tonight, in the last few hours, a rapturous reception on the conference scene for Andy McDonald. Now, I do have to say that the leadership are very relaxed about his departure. I spoke to one front bench supporter of Keir Starmer who was absolutely grinning at the prospect that he has gone. And I think the leadership are hoping and thinking they are going to win this battle with the left. And if they can do that, this party doesn't need to look inward. It can turn outward and be relevant in the sort of big debate that's taking place in the UK today. So today I was here at the conference, which was overshadowed by the departure from the shadow cabinet of one of the last supporters of Jeremy Corbyn. An autumnal tempest beckons on the high seas. Calmer on shore, but political winds brewing. Andy, hi, it's Nick.
Hi, Nick.
One of the last supporters of Jeremy Corbyn in the shadow cabinet resigned, citing two main reasons. Andy McDonald said he'd been told not to campaign in favour of a £15 an hour minimum wage, raising questions, he said, about Keir Starmer's commitment to socialism. Trouble had been brewing for some time, but this instruction today from the new shadow Chancellor explains why the left are not happy.
I do not take lightly the responsibility to see that public money is spent well and that public finances are kept under control. Let's be honest, that will involve difficult choices for me and for my colleagues. We will not shrink from those choices.
And the second reason for quitting, a hint of anger over changes to leadership election rules, which will make it all but impossible for the left to field a candidate. Andy MacDonald said he just made the most difficult decision of his career in resigning from Keir Starmer's shadow cabinet.
I made my promise to him that I would serve him if he wanted me to in his shadow cabinet. I did not vote for him, but I thought he would win. But given the pledges that he made for in his leadership campaign, I wanted to serve him and pursue those 10 pledges with him. I think this issue is inconsistent with that economic promise, and that is why I feel absolutely no choice other than to part company from the shadow cabinet. I can't remember, I've been in the party since 1979, and I can't remember a sense of such deep division. Of course we've had our battles and difficulties over the years, but we seem to be determined to focus on the issues that divide us and not unite us. And you know, we'll only get into government if we resolve this. And I hope that my coming out today on this key issue will nudge us in that direction.
Keir Starmer is an innately cautious politician who appeared to falter over the weekend when he took the dramatic step of staging a showdown with the left over how this party is run and over how it would govern. He prevailed, to the delight of his supporters and to the dismay of the left, who fear once again being seen in this party as a fringe group. Tonight, a rousing reception from the left for the new dissident, and disappointment amongst his allies.
I'm very disappointed indeed. Andy's been doing some fantastic work on employment rights, and unfortunately that got lost within the earlier debacle of focusing entirely inwards on on the method of electing Keir's replacement, which was quite bizarre.
Barry Gardner, can I ask for your reaction to the resignation of your good friend Andy MacDonald?
I was shocked. I am deeply disappointed. Andy is somebody who has spoken up for the rights of working people in this country for many years, and only the other night I was in a panel with Keir where Keir was praising the work that he'd done in producing the Green Paper. I don't understand it, but I do need to speak to both parties to find out what's really happened.
Do you think that this is no longer a warm home, it's a cold home for the left?
That's your statement, not mine.
Little sympathy from supporters of Keir Starmer.
What matters is winning and being in government, so we can actually make our country the great place that it really deserves to be.
Can I ask for your reaction to the resignation of Andy MacDonald from the shadow cabinet?
Well, if Andy feels that he cannot sign up to Keir Starmer's agenda, then I completely think it's reasonable that he should resign.
Evening and no let-up from an angry sea. A striking backdrop for a party in strife with a leadership determined that it will win.
Nick Watt there. Well, joining us now, Ian Murray, the Shadow Secretary of State for Scotland and former candidate for Deputy Leader. He's the only Labour MP in the whole of Scotland right now. Ian Murray, do you understand why Andy MacDonald found his position untenable? Are you shedding any tears over his departure?
I'm incredibly angry and disappointed and frustrated because Andy MacDonald appears to be suggesting that he resigned over a policy that he wrote and launched to much acclaim 48 hours ago in the conference chamber. So I'm not quite so sure why he's resigned, because it was his policy and he was asked to defend that policy in what's a composite meeting for the debate tomorrow, and resigned and refused to do so, and then said it was because the party was more divided than it's been in 18 months. The very person that's caused that division today claiming there's division. OK, so he wrote in the letter to Keir Starmer, your leader, yesterday your office instructed me to go into a meeting and argue against the national minimum wage of 15% and against statutory sick pay. I guess if Labour's job is not to stick up for the poorest people and push up the minimum wage, what is it? Well, our policy is to put up the minimum wage, and we'd like it to go to £10 an hour today. And then we'll have a policy as we get into the next election. And statutory sick pay is something we've been fighting for right the way throughout COVID, and will continue to do so. And Andy and Angela Rayner on Saturday launched our new deal for working people, which was to reorientate the party towards working people in this country, and launched that with some great policies that included these to much acclaim. So it's very difficult to understand why Andy MacDonald has resigned. Well, I think it could be orchestrated, it could could be sabotage, it could be self-interest. I've no idea. You would maybe have to get some clarity from him himself, but everyone's incredibly angry.
Sorry, let's just break that down. You think he's trying to sabotage what? Your conference, or Keir Starmer's leadership, or what you might call the right of the party? What?
I think he's probably trying to undermine Keir Starmer's leadership. What Keir's done this week is on Saturday, put through a lot of rules to make sure that the party can modernise, it can turn away from internal discussions and talk to the British public and the voters, in order for Sunday, Monday and into his speech on Wednesday to be about policies. We had a great speech from Rachel Reeves in your package that you mentioned some of it there about how Labour would deal with the economy and some of the principles and fiscal framework that we put in place for that. And that's all been overshadowed today by a resignation where nobody's quite sure why he's resigned from a policy that he wrote and he launched just 48 hours ago.
They think that the overshadow came from Keir Starmer himself. I mean, underlying all this is the sense that the left are feeling duped by Keir Starmer. They thought they got somebody who aligned himself with many of Jeremy Corbyn's policies as he sat on his front bench. I mean, when you look back at the people who've got into power, whether it was David Cameron or Tony Blair, they told their parties hard truths before they got elected. He shape-shifted, didn't he? That's why they're upset.
Well, let's give you the hard truth. The hard truth is that we are facing an 80-seat Conservative majority. That's a legacy that the previous leadership left the Labour Party in, and I think that let the country down. Keir Starmer came in 18 months ago, determined to modernise the party, get it facing towards voters and put together a policy platform that was looking to the future, that had credibility and had workers right at the heart of it. That's what Keir's been trying to do this weekend. This is the first conference that we've had because of COVID since Keir Starmer became leader. He's got the rules through in a very balanced package, and that's what we should be celebrating.
Does modernise mean kicking the left of the party into the cold? I mean, Barry Gardiner couldn't quite answer that question, but I'm wondering whether that's basically what Keir Starmer feels he has to do now.
Well, Emily, what modernisation means is that rather than making sure that MPs are talking to themselves because they're going through reselection processes, that they can talk to their voters and talk to the public, it means that the leader and deputy leadership of the party has the majority support of the Parliamentary Labour Party, which is incredibly important. It's about thresholds, and it's about making sure that all of those rules of the party that came in that balanced package from Keir Starmer are now set aside, and we can go forward and talk to the public and the voters, which is why we should be here. As the country is falling apart, the Labour Party seems to be again wanting to argue with itself rather than go with that policy platform. One of the other promises, of course, that Keir Starmer gave when he was elected 18 months ago was to rid the party of the cancer of anti-Semitism. Right. And with the re-entry today of Dame Louise Ellman rejoining the party, we're well on the road to concluding that. And I think that's a massive achievement, modernising the party, facing the public and putting forward a policy platform that's positive and looking to the future. That's what we should be doing this week.
Let's look at some of those pledges, because those are also points that have been raised by Annie MacDonald, some of those on the left of the party, whether it's about the nationalisation of energy, which now seems to have been dropped, whether it's, I'm going to ask you one which is in his 10 points, defending free movement as we leave the EU. Is that still a Labour policy? Would you say that the shortages of staff and drivers that we're seeing right now at the moment in this country are as a consequence of Brexit? Is that what Labour believes?
Well, we've got a significant shortage across a whole number of sectors at the moment that's highlighted very clearly in our communities through the lack of HGV drivers. And Keir Starmer said clearly on Sunday we should bring in as many experienced HGV drivers as we can
from the EU?
From wherever we can get them in order to be able to resolve, of course from Europe and other places, in order to be able to resolve that short-term crisis and then look at the long-term of how we resolve this. And one of the key things I think with this, it also highlights why Andy MacDonald is so wrong to resign and the reasons for it, because HGV drivers, partly the reason the road haulage industry is in such crisis is because poor paying conditions, and the whole point of us having a new day for working people and orientating the party towards a newer economy for working people is to deal with those paying conditions that is causing this problem of driver shortages. So that's why it's important to get onto those issues and not talking about these internal squabbles within the party.
Ian Murray, thank you very much. Thanks for joining us. So back to those queues on the roads then, none of which, it should be said, are caused by an actual shortage of fuel. How did we get to a place where a warning not to panic caused so much concern that large numbers of people went into panic buying overdrive? The root causes are there. A shortage of hauliers over the past decade has been exacerbated by COVID, making travel harder, and Brexit ending free movement within the EU. And some in the industry just deciding they'd had enough of the hard conditions on our roads and the meagre pay. The government is trying to to woo back workers with short-term visas, measures the industry say barely touches the sides, as well as encouraging other UK drivers. So how do we get back to a state of economic normal when there's rising inflation and hikes in the cost of living? Here's Ben Chew.
As a nation, we're famously good at queuing.
What are you queuing up for?
And sometimes good at panicking too.
Don't panic! Don't panic!
Even when perhaps we know it's counterproductive.
The problem is not a shortage of petrol. There is enough fuel to go around. The problem is the sudden surge in demand. People are draining filling stations like this one and storing the fuel in their cars. Why? Well, following reports last week that a small number of filling stations were having trouble getting resupplied, people reacted as you might imagine, fearing that they might not have the fuel they need for an important journey because others are draining the fuel. They felt they had no choice but to join those queues. And so the cycle goes on. So how do you stop a panic like this?
I think we've seen a lot of finger wagging from flag-bedecked ministerial cupboards. Just to say there's plenty of fuel, don't panic, tells nobody anything. The sort of things you have to say to people are, we face a situation where actually people are buying lots of fuel every day when they don't need to. But if people resume normal buying patterns, we can get the system back into balance again.
We're counting in, stand by.
They require a rational explanation. And that's what eventually had to happen in 2000, and eventually it worked.
There's no sign of a quick end to the petrol crisis as protests continue.
Tonight, shelves are emptying and most petrol stations are still dry. The health service is cancelling operations and the army may have to move in.
That episode was, of course, when protesters blockaded refineries in opposition to the Blair government's plans to tax fuel more heavily.
There was a moment when a guy who was public health director in the north of England confronted people who were picketing a refinery and said, do you realise the effect you're having on the National Health Service in my area?
We have set up a crisis centre for the region, exactly the same as we would for a terrorist incident. That's the severity of what's going on.
That actually started to turn people's minds towards what was happening. Public mood is very, very important in these circumstances.
Today, the government declined to activate plans to bring soldiers in to drive tankers, at least for now. And a statement from fuel firms suggested the pressure could fizzle out naturally as people's vehicle tanks fill up and they lack the means to store more. The shortage of fuel suggested by the headlines might be a phantom menace. Nevertheless, the underlying spark for it, a dearth of HGV and tanker drivers, is certainly real enough. The most intense opposition in Whitehall to the relaxation of visa rules for hauliers had come from the Home Secretary, Priti Patel. Reports suggest she feared it would open the door to pressure for more migration from other industries. It's not an unjustified fear. The haulage sector is by no means the only sector of the economy that's been heavily reliant on EU migrant labour. EU-born workers made up 13% of drivers and mobile machine operators in 2019. A similar proportion of EU workers were in the food preparation sector. And EU migrants made up almost a fifth of factory and construction workers. All these are now facing severe pressures due to outflows of EU workers during the pandemic.
Many of our members are in the food sector and we're hearing from them really difficult stories of them trying to adjust. I have a dessert manufacturer who supplies a lot of the supermarkets in membership. They've really struggled to recruit. They're carrying huge amount of vacancies. We've got a poultry manufacturer who's carrying about 1/10 of its workforce in vacancies at the moment, and they would usually expand as we go into the Christmas period.
But isn't this the discredited old model of relying on migrant labour and not training the domestic workforce?
The overall political objective of having skills within this country is a perfectly valid objective. I think the problem that we're facing now is that we had that huge transition without a plan. I think if we'd worked together with a plan, business, government and other stakeholders, we could have got to the point where we'd have a really strong workforce. But that's going to take many years. It's not something that we can just transition to overnight.
In the wake of the ministerial U-turn on visas for EU hauliers, and amid scenes of palpable national anxiety, industry senses now is the time to push for a sweeping reversal of the post-Brexit policy on migrant labour.
Ben Chu, we can talk now. The Conservative MP and Brexit supporter Andrew BRIGHTON and the boss of Iceland supermarket, Richard Walker. And I know you've both got an interest in this because, Andrew, you were in a business running a fleet before. But let me just start with Richard, because you're in the food sector now. You said last week you're 100 drivers short of what you need. How do you fill that gap?
Well, look, the temporary visas that the government announced may help. I mean, it can't do any harm in terms of not doing it. The problem is it is a bit of a sticking plaster solution. And actually, we've dug into the details now. And I think the practicalities of it, and therefore the likelihood of it really helping us, probably won't do much. So, look, we're doing what we can. And actually, as your report said, it's about paying people more money. The job is tough. It is a hard job. And actually, I think wage inflation, even though it will cost us a lot of money, is a good thing over the long term. But that 100 driver shortage that you mentioned, and in the UK, it's anything up to 100,000, that won't help, particularly with Christmas around the corner. We have a key trading time of year where we're starting to build stocks, and we need more and more stock into our depots and then onwards into our stores. And that's proving to be very difficult, not just for us, but also for our suppliers, goods into our depots from our suppliers and manufacturers, and then goods out to our stores.
So how do you solve that, Andrew BRIGHTON? Real dilemmas that businesses face with critical shortages of labour. You can talk about retraining in the long term, but right now we're looking at Christmas.
If you're talking about hauliers, I think the wages are rising for lorry drivers. We are seeing people returning to the industry. I think there's things the government can do to make that easier. I think a suspension for 12 months of the driver CPC regulations would make it much easier for those who've left the industry to return. And as I've said many times, Emily, we're not actually short of qualified lorry drivers in this country. We've probably got twice as many as we need.
So can you do that?
Those are people who don't want to work in the industry on the pay and conditions that are currently being offered.
Richard, can you do this just within the confines of quicker tests, UK drivers, without giving more free movement to EU workers?
Well, I think anyone who, I mean, I voted Brexit, but anyone who voted Leave expecting no immigration in the future will be sorely disappointed. We do, of course, need people coming in and out of this country, and we will always be reliant on it. That's the reality. So anything that eases that burden now will help us. I should say that our supply lines are strong because we're frozen experts. We can plan further ahead than most, but of course it's not the case for many competitors.
Andrew, isn't the truth that there is no economic model in which more barriers and less efficiency can lead to growth? And right now, it's the growth that's going to deliver the higher wages. It's the growth that's going to solve the problems and the shortages and get consumers their deals and their Christmas dinner in time.
Well, one of the challenges we face at the moment actually is the UK economy has got the highest growth in the G7.
Well, that's because of where we came from, to be fair.
And that's a challenge. That's a huge step change from where we were when we were in COVID. I can see that the short-term 3-month visas for lorry drivers and a few other staff in the run-up to Christmas, they're a short-term stopgap, but they don't address the underlying problems in the haulage industry that we need to address. In a way, they're rather like a lifetime alcoholic just nipping back to the bar for one more drink. It's not going to solve anything. That's fundamental to the industry.
Richard Walker.
And also, actually, if I may jump in on that, it's not 3 months, so it doesn't start till mid-October. It finishes on December the 24th. So I don't know who would give up a full-time job in Europe to come and work here for a matter of weeks. They also have to be double jabbed or quarantined for 2 weeks.
So what would you need? What do you actually need to see now as a concrete measure, Richard?
I don't know. I think if a lot of these devil in the detail restrictions are lifted, a simple kind of 3 to 6 month visa for HGV drivers would at least allow us to get through Christmas. But certainly now we've looked into the detail of this temporary visa, it really isn't all we hoped it would be. And I don't think it'll help that much.
Andrew, if the solution is higher wages for truckers and drivers, you'll...
and working conditions and improved
working conditions. You'll accept that someone has to pay for that, and those costs will be passed on through businesses to the consumer. So ultimately, you're advocating a higher cost of living.
Well, the consumer pays for everything, Emily, whether it's BBC output or fuel. That's the way the economy works.
But you're happy to see that. That's all I'm saying. If drivers' wages are higher, that will get passed on to the consumer, and you're saying that's fine.
Well, we're going to move from a low-wage, low productivity economy to a high-wage, high productivity economy, and these are the growing pains.
OK. Thank you both very much indeed. Thanks for joining us. Now, the Brexit vote was 5 long years ago. The Brexit deal was struck nearly 2 years ago. And yet the tentacles, as you're seeing, of those decisions are being felt more vividly today than perhaps ever before, whether it's discussions over rising wages of lorry drivers or the migrant worker shortages in so many of our sectors, whether it's vaccine passports or defence deals or the way we now handle migrants crossing the Channel. It largely comes back to the decision we took that night. Tonight in a UK broadcast exclusively, we talk to the man who negotiated that deal for the EU, Michel Barnier, recently published his book, My Secret Brexit Diaries.
Today is a day of relief, but tinged by some sadness.
The EU's chief negotiator, ending 4 years of often tortuous back and forth as he announced a post-Brexit trade deal, was finally done. Before our decision to leave the EU, few would have known Michel Barnier, a Brussels insider who spent all his working life at the heart of European politics. But in July 2016, he was given the role that has ultimately defined his career and, until now, his legacy.
All in all, there will be less than 18 months to negotiate.
He became an almost nightly fixture on our TV screens and front pages.
Are you going to get a deal today?
As the man facing the UK's team across the table as the EU and the UK thrashed out Brexit.
No, I'm very pleased to catch up with David Davis, just ahead of the new round of negotiations.
But what else do we know about the 70-year-old Frenchman Remainers came to admire as he faced down his opposing British numbers?
Well-dressed, utterly charming, speaks beautiful English. I mean, everything's right about the bloke, apart from his views on the European Union.
He was first elected to the French National Assembly when he was just 27. And now, with Brexit behind him, he is once again turning his hand to domestic politics, seeking to replace Emmanuel Macron as President of France.
Bonjour, Monsieur Barnier.
Mr. Barnier says he wants to be President of a reconciled France, but he's already raised eyebrows. Last week, he stunned ex-Brussels colleagues by saying it was time for France to regain sovereignty from the European courts. So what to make of this new project for the man who spent his career as a committed European? He'll be remembered in Britain for Brexit, but how will he reflect on the deal that divorced us from Europe? Well, I sat down a little earlier with Michel Barnier and I began by asking if he felt the negotiations has ended up where he'd expected.
My answer can be yes, because we had the negotiation. It was longer than expected, certainly. We were surprised by the fact that Theresa May didn't reach an agreement on her own majority. I think that the negotiation was correct because, and were correct because we had the negotiation on a deal, and it was clearly our goal to avoid the cliff edge. Huh?
The May proposal was your preferred route. You write that you lamented many obstacles that were put in her path, and I wonder if you regret not making life easier for her to get that deal passed.
It was her duty, her responsibility to get the support of the House of Commons, not our responsibility. Huh? So we reached an agreement with Theresa May, and she agreed with this agreement. Huh?
You recognise in your diaries at the very beginning that Europe is perhaps out of touch with legitimate concerns of people, places where the majority voted Brexit, Brexit voters who felt that they had been mistreated by EU bureaucrats, by grey politicians with little accountability in their lives. What would you say to them?
I think I can say to them, and exactly to the same people in France or in Belgium and in the Netherlands, that we have to understand and to listen and to answer to these people. When you try to understand the reason of the Brexit, the most important for me has been and still is the social anger, the popular feeling of the poorest region in the UK, because this social anger and this popular feeling, which is not the populism, exactly the same in France. So we have to understand, we have to listen, we have to answer, but the answers are not all in Brussels. A part of the answer are in London or in Paris or in Madrid.
You're quite damning about some of the politicians leading the Brexit crusade. You flatter on occasion, but you also say Dominic Raab is decidedly not a man of great subtlety. Jeremy Hunt, you say, rather odd. David Frost spoke arrogantly. David Davis, amongst others, vulnerable to ideology and nostalgia. Did you respect any of the ones that you were negotiating with?
No, I expressed my feeling about one or several members of the British team, and I'm sure they did the same in the British press, if I look clearly all the comments. But it's important to be honest and to be clear about ourselves.
Dominic Cummings called you a lazy, emotional bullshitter. What did you make of that?
Nothing. There's no. I have no comment about Cummings. I never met Mr. Cummings. For perhaps one time in the 10 Downing Street with Johnson, and I never speak with him. So I'm not sure he knew or he knows clearly what happened in the negotiation. So there is no importance for me of the Cummings comments about me.
You don't think he knew what was going on?
No importance.
So why would he say lazy or emotional?
I don't know.
Brexiteers say now it's already paid dividends in terms of the vaccine rollout, in terms of the Global Defence Alliance, AUKUS, in terms of the migrant crossing rules or the visa numbers that it's allowed the UK to decide on. What would you respond to that?
I always wish the best for the UK, despite the Brexit. I think simply that being alone in the global world where we are, this world around us is dangerous, unstable, fragile. I think everything could be easier or less difficult if we are together.
But I guess they would say, clearly, we're not alone. The UK is not alone. They've just made a massive global defence pact with Australia and America, and they've shut the French out of that.
We will see if this alliance or contract is massive, as you say. One point of this issue, and this contract, which has been cancelled without any kind of pre-discussion between us, I think that if you look at the future, not only the present, that it is important between allies to have trust and to have confidence. And it is my point on this contract with Australia. I think, first of all, that an alliance cannot be an allegiance. An alliance needs trust and confidence. And clearly in that case, we will see what could happen between France and UK, between EU and UK. I think it's not a good news, it's a bad news that the trust and the confidence have been fragilized by the attitude of the UK and the US.
President Macron looked very offended by this deal. Do you think he overreacted?
No, I think the reaction of the French president was correct.
Olaf Scholz, who may yet become Germany's next Chancellor, has blamed the trucking crisis that we're seeing here now, the HGV drivers, on the British decision to leave the EU and free movement. Our Transport Secretary, Grant Shapps, has said, actually, Brexit makes us more nimble. We can issue visas when we want. What do you think?
Once again, I wish the best for the UK. I think it was an incredible decision to leave the single market, to end the freedom of movement. It is a British choice. It's too late now to come back on the past. Our main asset is the single market, and a key part of the single market is the freedom of movement. So you will see what could happen in UK, but the UK has to face the consequences and to assume the consequences of Brexit. Nobody else.
Let's look at Northern Ireland then, because as you said, this remains the most complicated part of the equation. You heard First Minister Jeffrey Donaldson threatening to pull out of power sharing if the protocol wasn't overturned. For the sake of peace, shouldn't the protocol go?
What is at stake in Ireland is not about trade or food or goods, it's about peace. And this clear danger for the peace in Ireland, in case of any trouble for the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. And we take a lot of time to work with the British government. With Theresa May, one time, two times, three times. We found a solution with Theresa May. And finally, we found an agreement with Boris Johnson, not against him, not without him, but with him. And once again, every word, every sentence was negotiated.
They understood exactly what the protocol meant. Yes. You're sure about that?
They are serious people. So there is no surprise. There was no surprise.
But you recognise that it's not working. The protocol is not working.
We need to respect the signature. There is no surprise.
But if Jeffrey Donaldson says it's the end of power sharing, if that's not going to create peace, does the EU not have to be more flexible right now?
We are ready. As the Vice President of the Commission, Maroš Šefčovič, said several times, including a few days ago, we are ready to find practical and operational solutions in the framework of the protocol, not for renegotiating the protocol. Because this protocol has been negotiated by serious people on both sides, very serious people, and Mr. Boris Johnson is a serious Prime Minister. So we negotiate with his team, with himself. He knew exactly what he signed. I think it cannot be possible to drop this protocol because it's the only way to find a solution for all the problems created by the Brexit. What creates problem in Ireland is Brexit, nothing else. Huh?
Let's talk about your own views. Last month you called for France to be allowed a referendum on immigration next September, and you suggested that France couldn't control its immigration without being permanently threatened at the level of the ECJ. You said France must regain its legal sovereignty.
For some key and specific issue of immigration only.
Which are what? So you're talking about free movement? No. You're talking about immigration from outside the EU?
We have to avoid any kind of misunderstanding. Yeah? The free movement of people inside Europe is not at stake. Yeah? I want to protect and to maintain the free movement of people between the 27 member states. What is at stake for me is a way for my country or for the Germans and for the others to be able to take some national decisions on a very specific issue for the migration coming from a third country, from outside.
So why do you think that the ECJ is controlling what you want to do? Because you can control your economic migration already.
There is some points where we need to be free to take national decisions. And we have nothing, really nothing, or not the right word in the Constitution of France about migration. So we have to take our decision by ourselves, but it is not linked to the Brits. It's not linked to the Brexit.
Nigel Farage has called you the biggest hypocrite ever born.
Farage launched his campaign for the Brexit against the freedom of movement. I'm not speaking of freedom of movement inside Europe. I'm speaking just to have the legal tool to control in a better way the migration coming from outside.
Is Brexit a success from the European perspective?
Brexit is lose-lose. The Brexit is lose-lose for both sides. This is my answer.
Can we re-find our relations and our goodwill and work together?
I think that we need, if we put into perspective our common interest in the next few years and the next years, we have to be very careful about the level of trust and confidence between us, because we will need to work together. And I hope, despite what happened with Australia, this contract, what happened with the fishery issue, what happened in Ireland, if everybody in both sides try to put into perspective our common interest, we will need to work together between the UK and the EU and between the UK and France.
Dominic Cummings reflected that no one on earth knows whether Brexit will turn out to be a good thing for Britain. Did that surprise you? Is he right?
It seems to be a little bit late for him to say such a sentence. Huh? It's late, or too late, because the Brexit is there. The Brexit is done.
Do you think Britain can flourish outside the EU, or do you believe that the UK will ultimately rejoin?
No, it will be for the British people to decide, not for me. The door is still open in any case, and I wish the best for the UK in any case.
Mr. Barnier, thank you very much. Michel Barnier with some of his views on Brexit. That's all from us for tonight. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.